Welcome back to Under Baobab Skies. Tonight, we delve into why you wouldn't last a day as a Tunisian salt flat worker. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows across the African savanna, we gather around the flickering flames of our campfire. The air is thick with the scent of acacia wood and distant memories. Lean in close, dear listeners, for we have tales to tell that will transport you to a land both harsh and beautiful. Beneath the vast and unforgiving sun of southern Tunisia lies a realm that glares back at the heavens. A place so white, so wide, so dry, it could almost be mistaken for a dream or a punishment. This is the Chat El Gerard, the great salt flat where mirages shimmer like ghosts and nothing grows except the silence. But once upon a time, and not so long ago, this land was alive with movement. Berber workers, wrapped in faded scarves and dusted in white, walked into the glare each morning, and walked out again with salt on their backs and stories in their bones. Can you feel the heat rising from the parched earth? Can you taste the salt on your lips as the wind whispers tales of forgotten toil? They were not mining gold, not diamonds, just salt, that ancient mineral more valuable than silver in the days before refrigeration. Salt that was shipped by camel and rail, salt that paid taxes, fed cities, and seasoned the mouths of empires, but it came at a price. Hands cracked open like the very earth they worked. Lips split from dehydration, thirsting for relief that rarely came. Eyes half blind from the reflection of a sun that never blinked. And feet that knew no comfort except the slow relief of dusk. As the flames dance before us, casting warm light on our faces, let us pause and consider the weight of history that rests upon this land. For tonight, under Baobab Skies, we bring you 4 stories. 4 chapters from North Africa's harsh, beautiful past. We begin with the salt workers, and why even one day in their world could humble the strongest. Picture yourself standing at the edge of that vast white expanse, the horizon shimmering in the distance. Could you endure the relentless heat, the back-breaking labor, the isolation that stretched as far as the eye could see? Then we meet Abu Yazid, the man on the donkey, who dared to defy an empire in the name of justice and faith. His tale is one of rebellion and conviction, a reminder that even in the harshest of lands, the human spirit can burn bright with defiance. Next, we travel even further back, to the Roman saltworks of Chemtu, where ancient machines and enslaved labor shaped the early economy of Africa. Close your eyes and listen to the creaking of wooden gears, the clang of metal on stone, the murmur of voices speaking long-dead languages, and finally, we enter the hidden world of the Ottoman Beys of Tunis, with their silk cushions, lemon gardens, and long corridors of gold, a world of opulence built upon the sweat and toil of those who came before, a stark contrast to the salt flats that stretch beyond the palace walls. Every story is connected by heat that sears the skin and parches the throat, by history that wins its way through centuries like a river through the desert, by human hands, calloused and scarred, and holy rebellions that shook the very foundations of empires. As the night deepens and the stars emerge above us, bright pinpricks in the velvet sky, we invite you to lose yourself in these tales of struggle and survival, of power and perseverance. Let the crackling of the fire become the whisper of ancient winds, carrying the echoes of those who walked these lands before us. So breathe slow, dear listeners. Lie still upon the warm earth. Let the dust of ages past settle across your imagination, coating your thoughts in the fine white powder of the salt flats. You're listening to Under Baobab Skies, and the story begins now. As we embark on this journey through time and across the scorched landscape of Tunisia, remember that each grain of salt holds within it a story, a testament to the endurance of those who came before us. Their legacy is etched in the very land itself, waiting to be uncovered by those who dare to look beyond the glare of the present. So gather close, friends, let the warmth of our shared humanity shield us from the chill of forgotten histories. For in these tales of salt and sweat, of rebellion and riches, we find reflections of our own struggles, our own triumphs. The night is young, the fire burns low, and the stories of under baobab skies are about to unfold. Are you ready to step into the shimmering heat of the Chatelje? To walk in the footsteps of those who shaped a nation with their bare hands? Take a deep breath. Feel the weight of history settling upon your shoulders. And listen, for the whispers of the past are about to become a roar. Picture the Chatel Gerard again, not as a postcard, but as a workplace. The horizon is a cruel trick here. You think you see water, but there's none. Only glassy illusions that pull your gaze while the real threat hammers your body. It's a place where mirages dance on the edge of vision, where the sky meets the earth in a shimmering haze of heat. But this isn't a tourist dream. This is where men come to work, to bleed, to burn. The men who worked this land were mostly Berbers, locals who knew the land's moods, but never quite tamed them. They came wrapped in whatever cloth could cover the skin, because exposed flesh here didn't just tan, it blistered, it split, it peeled like parchment from too many days under a burning sky. Their faces, etched with lines deeper than the cracks in the salt crust, tell stories of generations who've battled this unforgiving landscape. Eyes squint against the glare, skin weathered by wind and salt, hands calloused from endless toil. There was no shelter, no shade, not even the mercy of a breeze. The salt flats stretch endlessly, a white expanse that reflects the sun's fury with brutal efficiency. The air shimmers, thick with heat, making every breath a struggle. Sweat evaporates before it can offer relief, leaving only salt crystals clinging to skin. The tools were simple. Wooden rakes, baskets, sacks, but the work backbreaking. The workers raked surface crusts into uneven piles, let it dry, then carried the loads on their backs or by cart, dragging, lifting, loading, repeating, hour after hour, with only the distant promise of coin or bread to keep them going. The rhythm of labor is relentless. Rake scraping against salt, the crunch of crystals underfoot, the groan of overloaded carts. Bodies bend and straighten, a dance choreographed by necessity and honed by generations. And then there was the salt itself. Salt, when wet, bites. It finds every crack in your skin, every scratch, every blister, and sets it on fire. And when it dries, it forms crystals, sharp ones. So now your wounds are not just sore, they're cutting you anew, again and again and again. It's an enemy and a prize. This salt, it preserves life and takes it in equal measure. In the markets of distant cities, it's weighed like gold. Here, on the Chatel Gerard, it weighs on men's souls. Men wrapped their feet in layers of cloth. Some even used animal hides. But it barely helped. The salt crept in. It always crept in. You can see them now, can't you? Figures moving slowly across the vast white plain. Their wrappings flutter in the hot wind, offering scant protection. With each step, a wince. With each load, a grimace. The salt finds its way into every crevice, every pore. They didn't call this job a blessing. They called it a sentence passed down through bloodlines, a legacy written in sweat and salt. Some say their ancestors angered the desert gods, Others claim it's the price of survival in a land where water is more precious than gold. And yet, they came back each morning for their families, for survival, for the rhythm of a life carved into the crust of this land. The sun hasn't yet cleared the horizon when they gather. Shadows long, voices low, there's a ritual to it. Checking tools, adjusting wrappings, a shared glance that speaks volumes. They know what waits for them out there, because this wasn't just labor, it was economy, it was history. Salt from the Châtel, Gerard traveled far. It preserved food in coastal cities, flavored dishes in mountain villages, paid soldiers' wages in distant lands. Every crystal harvested here rippled outward, touching lives far beyond the salt flats. And in Tunisia, history has never been soft. It's etched in stone, carved by wind, written in the very salt these men harvest. Phoenicians, Romans, Arabs, French, all have come for the white gold of the Châtel Gerard. All have left their mark. The salt workers are part of that legacy now. Their labor, their pain, their endurance, it's all woven into the fabric of this place. As the day wears on, the sun climbs higher. The air shimmers with heat, distorting distant figures into wavering ghosts. The salt glitters, a sea of diamonds that offers no relief. You can almost hear the rasp of breath, the scrape of tools, the creak of overburdened carts, the sounds of human struggle against an indifferent landscape. And still, they work, backs bent, skin raw, eyes stinging. They work, because to stop is to admit defeat. To stop is to let the salt win. As afternoon fades into evening, the light changes. The white expanse takes on hues of gold and rose, a beauty that mocks the day's harsh labor. The workers straighten. Slowly, painfully, tools are gathered. The last loads are hauled away, but the day's work isn't done. Not really. Back in their homes, in the villages that cling to the edges of the salt flats, there are wounds to tend, salt-encrusted clothes to soak, meager meals to prepare, and always, always, the knowledge that tomorrow will bring more of the same. Yet in the quiet of the evening, as the heat of the day slowly dissipates, there's a different kind of beauty. You can see it in the way these men gather, sharing a simple meal, exchanging quiet words. There's pride here, beneath the exhaustion. Pride in endurance, in providing, in being part of something larger than themselves. For this is more than just a job. It's a testament to human resilience, to the ability to find meaning in hardship, to forge community in the harshest of conditions. The salt of the Châtel Gerard has shaped more than just the landscape. It has shaped a people, a culture, a way of life. As night falls, the salt flats transform. Under the moon's cool glow, the endless white takes on an otherworldly beauty. It's easy, in this moment, to forget the day's brutal reality. But the men who work here don't forget. They carry the salt with them, in their aching muscles, their stinging wounds, the very pores of their skin. They are the salt of the earth. These workers, preserving a way of life, flavoring the history of this land with their sweat and their struggle. And tomorrow, before the sun rises, they'll return. To the salt that burns, to the work that breaks, to the life they've chosen, or that has chosen them, because in the end, this is their story. Written not in ink, but in salt. A story of endurance, of pain, of quiet dignity, a story that continues, day after burning day, on the endless white expanse of the Châtel. Imagine your mouth so dry that your tongue clicks against your teeth. No moisture, just the taste of metal, dust, ... and salt. That's what it felt like by mid-morning on the Châtel Gerard. By then, the sun wasn't rising anymore. It was pressing down. The heat didn't just warm you, it distorted everything. The horizon shimmered like glass. It clung to your feet like a prisoner in chains. Dehydration came fast. Not the kind you fix with a bottle of water, the kind that dries out your joints, cracks your lips till they bleed, and leaves your eyes blinking against a blinding white surface that never stops reflecting. It was the glare that punished most. The salt wasn't just on the ground, it was in the air. Carried as fine dust, it slipped into lungs and scratched at throats. Each breath felt like swallowing sandpaper, a constant reminder of the harsh environment that surrounded you. Some workers tied scarves over their mouths. Others squinted through makeshift goggles, pieces of glass, or tinted cloth held together with wire. But the salt always found a way in. It was relentless, seeping through every crack and crevice, a silent invader that knew no mercy. Your breath became raspy, your skin leathery, and your sight often blurred for days. The salt flat didn't just challenge your body, it waged war on your senses. Every moment was a battle against the elements, a struggle to maintain your humanity in a place that seemed determined to strip it away. There were no water trucks, no breaks in air-conditioned shade. If you were lucky, you had a tin flask under your cloth belt, filled before dawn from a nearby well. But even this small comfort came with a price. The water had a taste. Metallic, mineral-heavy, sometimes warm as tea before you could drink it. It was a far cry from refreshment, but it was all that stood between you and the unforgiving thirst that clawed at your throat. And yet, every hour you stood out there, you earned a handful of coins, enough to buy bread, to send your child to school, to settle a debt. Maybe because the salt might have been harsh, but poverty was harsher. It was a cruel equation, balancing survival against dignity, weighing the cost of your health against the needs of your family. They were not slaves, but they were not free either. Their enemy wasn't a master, it was a necessity. So they breathed grit, saw ghosts in the glare, and labored under a sky that offered no forgiveness. The salt flats became their world, a white expanse that stretched to the horizon, promising nothing but another day of toil. Salt, they say, preserves. But here, it only preserved the suffering. It etched lines into faces too young to be so weathered. It stole the moisture from eyes that had seen too much hardship. It left its mark on every worker, a silent testament to the price paid for survival. As the day wore on, the heat intensified. The air shimmered, creating mirages that danced on the horizon. Workers moved like their forms distorted by the waves of heat rising from the salt-crusted ground. Time seemed to stretch, each minute an eternity under the merciless sun. The salt flat fought back with every weapon in its arsenal. It reflected the sun's rays, turning the ground into a mirror that seared retinas and blistered skin. It cracked and shifted underfoot, making each step a gamble. And always, it thirsted for the moisture in your body, drawing it out through your pores, your breath, your very essence. By afternoon, the world narrowed to a pinpoint of existence. There was only the next step, the next shovel of salt, the next blink against the blinding glare. Thoughts of home, of family, of a life beyond this white hell. These were luxuries the salt flat didn't allow. It demanded all of your focus, all of your strength, just to keep moving. Some days, the wind would pick up, carrying salt in stinging clouds. It scoured exposed skin, found its way into eyes and nostrils, coated tongues with a gritty film. Workers huddled together, seeking shelter where there was none, their bodies bent against the onslaught. These were the moments when the salt flat truly showed its power, reminding everyone of their insignificance in the face of nature's wrath. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the crystalline landscape, a different kind of suffering set in. Muscles ached from hours of repetitive labor, joints creaked, Stiff from dehydration and overuse, the day's toll became impossible to ignore. Each movement a reminder of the body's limits. Yet still, they persevered, because beyond the salt flat lay lives that depended on their endurance. Children who needed food, roofs that needed repair, dreams that required sacrifice to realize. So they pushed on, ignoring the pain, the thirst, the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm them. Night brought little relief. The temperature dropped, but the salt remained. It clung to clothes, to skin, a constant presence, even in sleep. Dreams were haunted by endless white expanses, by the sound of salt crunching underfoot, by the taste that never quite left the back of the throat, and in the pre-dawn darkness, they rose again, bodies stiff, mouths dry, eyes gritty with sleep and salt. They filled their flasks, wrapped their scarves, and set out once more onto the white expanse. Because the salt flat didn't care about their suffering, it would be there, waiting, demanding, unforgiving as ever. This was life on the Chartelge, a daily battle against an environment that seemed designed to break the human spirit. Yet somehow, that spirit endured, in the shared glances between workers, in the small acts of kindness, a sip of water offered, a helping hand extended. Humanity persisted. They were not just workers. They were survivors. Warriors in a silent, grinding war against nature and necessity. Each day they returned was a victory. Each coin earned a testament to their resilience. The salt flat might preserve their suffering, but it also preserved their strength, their determination, their unwavering will to carry on. As the sun rises once more on the Chartel Gerard, casting its first rays across the crystalline surface, the cycle begins anew. Workers emerge from the shadows, their figures silhouetted against the brightening sky. They face another day of cracked lips and blurred vision, of aching bodies and parched throats. But they face it together, bound by a shared struggle, a common enemy. The salt flat may fight back with all its might, but it will never truly win. For as long as there are mouths to feed, dreams to chase, and lives to build, these workers will return. They will endure. They will persist. And in their persistence, they find a kind of freedom, a defiance against the very elements that seek to break them. Because in the end, it's not just about surviving the salt flat. It's about proving, day after day, that the human spirit is stronger than any force nature can muster. So they step out onto the white expanse once more, ready to face whatever the day may bring. The salt flat awaits, harsh and unforgiving as ever, but so do they. These unsung heroes of the Chartelge, ready to write another chapter in their endless battle against the elements. You wake at 4 a.m., no alarm, just the chill that clings to desert dawn. You wrap a scarf around your head, sip something bitter, and walk. No one speaks. There's no energy for chatter when your destination is the chart. By the time the first light rolls across the salt flats, you're already inside the glare. The world around you is a blinding white, stretching endlessly in every direction. It's as if you've stepped onto another planet, one made entirely of salt and sky. Now imagine this. You carry a rusted metal rake in one hand, a canvas sack in the other. Your boots, if you have them, are falling apart. Your socks, wet with brine before the sun even rises. The salt has already begun its work, seeping into every crack and crevice of your clothing, your skin, your very being. There's no boss yelling instructions, no safety inspector watching from the sidelines. Just your own survival instincts and a long, hot expanse of pain ahead. You're alone out here, in a way that city dwellers can never truly understand. The vastness of the salt flat swallows you whole, making you feel insignificant in the face of nature's raw power. The salt doesn't wait. It forms in jagged crystals, sharp enough to cut skin if handled wrong. Your job is to rake it into mounds, dry it under the sun, and bag it fast. Because if the wind shifts, or a rare rain comes, all your labor dissolves, literally, back into the crust. You work with a desperate urgency, knowing that every moment counts. Your movements become mechanical, a rhythm born of necessity. Rake, pile, bag, rake, pile, bag. The sun climbs higher in the sky, its heat intensifying with each passing hour. Sweat beads on your forehead, only to evaporate almost instantly in the dry air. By midday, your lower back is screaming. Your eyes water from the light. You try to blink, but every movement stings. The salt is everywhere. In your hair, your nostrils, the corners of your mouth. It tastes like exhaustion and determination mixed together. If your fingers blister, you wrap them in cloth. If your feet swell, you walk slower, but you don't stop, because the man next to you, older, stronger, quieter, isn't stopping either. He's a constant presence in your peripheral vision, a reminder of the endurance required to survive in this harsh environment. He's worked this flat for 17 years. You can see it in the deep lines etched into his face, in the way he moves with a practiced efficiency that you can only dream of. His silence speaks volumes about the toll this work takes on a person's soul. You're just trying to survive one day. One single day in a place that seems designed to break the human spirit. Each minute feels like an eternity. Each hour a battle against your own limitations. The motion of raking salt across the flat land becomes hypnotic. Your arms move of their own accord, muscles burning with the effort. You watch your hands shake, marveling at how they continue to grip the rake despite the tremors running through them. The tools you use are makeshift at best. Your rake is more rust than metal, held together by sheer willpower and necessity. Your canvas sack has been patched so many times, it is hard to tell where the original fabric ends and the repairs begin. These are not the tools of a job. They're the instruments of survival. Your shoes, if you can still call them that, are torn and salting. With each step, you feel the rough crystals grinding against your skin. Your socks, long since given up any pretense of dryness, squelch unpleasantly with every movement. The salt sticks to your skin like plaster, forming a second layer that cracks and flakes as you move. It's in your pores, under your nails, a constant reminder of the environment you're battling against. As you work, you catch glimpses of other figures in the distance, tiny human shapes against the blinding infinity of the salt flat. They move slowly, methodically, each person an island unto themselves in this vast white sea. By the time the sun begins to fall, you've stopped sweating. That's not good. It means your body's giving up its last reserves. You know, in a detached sort of way, that this is dangerous. But the thought feels distant, unimportant, compared to the immediate need to keep working. Your sack is full, your legs are numb, and in the silence of the walk home, you wonder how many more days your body can take. The quiet is oppressive, broken only by the crunch of salt under your feet and the occasional groan of exhaustion from your fellow workers. Salt pays, but it also collects its own price, pound by pound. You feel it in every ache, every burn, every cut on your hands. The salt takes from you, even as you harvest it. It's a cruel exchange, one that leaves you wondering if the cost is too high. As you trudge back to the small settlement you call home, you pass others returning from their day on the flat. Their faces are masks of fatigue, eyes glazed over with exhaustion. You recognize the look because you know it's mirrored on your own face. The sun sets quickly here, plunging the world into darkness. The temperature drops rapidly, a stark contrast to the blistering heat of the day. You shiver, pulling your salt-encrusted clothes tighter around your body. In the dim light of your small dwelling, you examine the day's toll. Your hands are raw, skin cracked and bleeding in places. Your feet, when you finally peel off your socks, are white and wrinkled, the skin between your toes rubbed raw by the constant friction. You clean yourself as best you can with the limited water available, wincing as you wash the salt from your wounds. Every movement is an effort, your muscles protesting after the long day of labor. As you lie down to sleep, your mind wanders. You think of the life you left behind, of the circumstances that brought you to this desolate place. You wonder if it was worth it, if the money you're earning can possibly compensate for the hardship you're enduring. But even as these thoughts swirl in your mind, you know you'll wake up tomorrow and do it all again. Because out here, on the salt flats, there are no other options. This is survival in its purest form. So, ... would you last a day? Would you last one? The question hangs in the air, unanswered. Because the truth is, you won't know until you're out there, rake in hand, salt stretching endlessly before you. Until you feel the sting of salt in your eyes, the burn in your muscles, the relentless beat of the sun on your back. This is not a job for the faint of heart. It's not a life for those who crave comfort or ease. It's a test of endurance, of will, of the human spirit's capacity to endure in the face of overwhelming odds. As sleep finally claims you, your last thought is of tomorrow, of the pre-dawn chill, the bitter drink, the long walk to the flat, of another day spent battling against nature, against your own limitations. Because out here, on the salt flats, that's all there is. One day at a time. One rakeful of salt. One step forward in a landscape that seems to go on forever. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find the strength to do it all again tomorrow. To prove to yourself and to the unforgiving salt that you can last more than just one day. Long before revolutions had microphones or slogans, they had riders. And in the year 944, one such rider came not with gold or soldiers, but with a donkey, a black banner, and a mouthful of thunder. His name was Abu Yazid, born in the rugged mountains of Nafusa, cradled by the whispers of ancient Berber tribes. Abu Yazid was forged in the fires of the Abadi faith, with its uncompromising purity, shaped his soul and sharpened his resolve. This was no ordinary rebel, no mere seeker of riches or power. The glitter of gold held no sway over him, nor did the soft caress of silk tempt his skin. No, Abu Yazid sought something far rarer, far more precious than any earthly treasure. Justice in his eyes. Justice could only be born from the ashes of the Fatimid Empire, that sprawling beast that had sunk its claws deep into from the sun-baked shores of modern Tunisia to the windswept plains of Algeria and the shimmering mirages of Libya, the Fatimids ruled with an iron fist wrapped in velvet. But iron rusts, and velvet tears, the moment Abu Yazid mounted that humble donkey, his weathered hands gripping not reins of leather but the very threads of destiny. He ceased to be just a man. He became a symbol, a living, breathing embodiment of defiance against corruption, a beacon of purity in a world drowning in excess. In his eyes burned a fire, the kind that ignites in the hearts of those who have witnessed too much injustice, too much suffering. This fire would spread. Town squares became his pulpit, the dusty streets his congregation. His voice, rough as desert stone yet clear as mountain streams, carried words that cut through the air like lightning. Farmers paused in their fields, tools forgotten in calloused hands as they listened. Smiths let their hammers fall silent, the ring of metal on metal replaced by the cadence of revolution. Tribes, long divided by ancient feuds, found common cause in his words. And always, always, he walked among the poor, Barefoot, his robes as worn and patched as theirs, he reminded them of a simple truth. Your rulers wear gold, but gold cannot feed the soul. Come with me, and we'll burn the empire clean. These were not empty words, not hollow promises whispered on the wind. Abu Yazid was a man of action, a force of nature barely contained in human form. He moved with the swiftness of a desert storm, gathering strength with every step, every mile. At first, in their gilded palaces and perfumed gardens, the Fatimids laughed. How could this man, this ragged figure astride a lowly donkey, pose any threat to their mighty dynasty? Surely this was but a fleeting amusement, a tale to be told over wine and sweetmeats. But laughter is a fickle thing, quick to turn to ash in the mouth. For when lightning strikes dry land, it doesn't ask permission, it doesn't negotiate, it simply is raw, elemental, unstoppable. And Abu Yazid was lightning incarnate. By the time the Fatimid rulers truly grasped the magnitude of what was unfolding, it was already too late. City after city fell to Abu Yazid's growing army, not through siege engines or battering rams, but through the sheer force of his conviction. He rolled across the plains of Ifriqiya like a storm cloud, heavy with the promise of change, dropping thunder in every direction. Kairwan, jewel of the Fatimid realm, trembled at his approach. Its mighty walls, which had withstood countless armies, crumbled before the weight of popular support. The people threw open the gates, welcoming Abu Yazid not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. In the wake of his advance, palaces burned, not out of wanton destruction, but as a cleansing fire, purging the land of excess and corruption. Fatimid soldiers, once proud in their gleaming armor, scattered like leaves before an autumn wind, and everywhere, in every liberated town and village, the air thrummed with chants of freedom, of justice long denied but finally within reach. But revolutions, even the most righteous, carry a terrible cost. And Abu Yazid would demand everything. For every victory, there was a price paid in blood. For every city liberated, another razed to the ground. The line between justice and vengeance, always razor-thin, began to blur. Some of Abu Yazid's followers, drunk on power and the intoxicating rush of revenge, committed atrocities in his name. Villagers that refused to join were put to the torch. Merchants who had prospered under Fatimid rule were stripped of their wealth, their families cast into the streets. Abu Yazid, the man who had begun this journey seeking only justice, found himself at the head of a force that threatened to become as tyrannical as the empire he sought to overthrow. The weight of leadership, of responsibility for thousands of lives, began to bow his shoulders. Nights that were once filled with fervent prayer and quiet contemplation now echoed with the screams of the wounded, the wails of the bereaved. His dreams, once vivid with visions of a just and equitable society, now ran red with blood. And still, the Fatimids, shocked out of their complacency, they marshaled their remaining strength. Gold flowed like water as they hired mercenaries, bought alliances, shored up defenses. The empire that Abu Yazid had hoped to topple in one swift campaign proved to be a wounded beast. Dangerous, unpredictable, fighting for its very survival. The war dragged on, months stretching into years. The initial fervor of revolution gave way to the grinding reality of prolonged conflict. Fields lay fallow, trade routes disrupted, entire regions teetering on the brink of famine. The very people Abu Yazid had sworn to liberate now suffered under the yoke of war. And through it all, the man on the donkey rode on. His black banner, once a symbol of hope and defiance, now seemed to absorb the light, a void against the sky. His voice, which had once roused thousands to action, grew hoarse with the strain of constant battle cries. Yet even as his body weakened, his resolve remained unbroken. For Abu Yazid knew that, to falter now, to lay down arms and sue for peace, would be to betray every soul who had rallied to his cause. Every farmer who had traded plough for sword, every mother who had sent her sons to fight, every child orphaned by the conflict. All of them looked to him as their last, best hope for a better future. And so he pushed on, deeper into Fatimid territory, closer to the heart of their power. Each step of his loyal donkey brought him nearer to either total victory or utter defeat. There would be no middle ground, no compromise. This was a war not just for land or resources, but for the very soul of Ifriqiya. As dawn broke over yet another battlefield, Abu Yazid raised his eyes to the horizon. In the distance, he could see the glittering spires of the Fatimid capital, a mirage of wealth and power that seemed to mock all he had fought for. His hand tightened on the hilt of his sword, his voice barely a whisper as he uttered a final prayer. Allah, grant me the strength for one last charge. Let my sacrifice, if it must come, pave the way for justice, and may those who follow remember not the man, but the cause. With that, he spurred his faithful mount forward, the thunder of hooves echoing the storm that had raged in his heart for so long. Behind him, an army roared to life, ready to follow their leader into the very jaws of destiny. For this was more than a battle, more than a war. This was the moment when history held its breath, waiting to see if one man's vision could truly change the world. Abu Yazid's march wasn't just a rebellion, it was a reckoning. From the sun-baked streets of Tripoli to the wind-swept heights of his name echoed like thunder. The man on the donkey, the Abadi Avenger, the black broom come to sweep corruption clean. He commanded no grand legions, no empire stood at his back. Just a conviction that the Fatimid rulers had strayed too far from both divine law and human compassion, and conviction, when forged in the fires of oppression, becomes a weapon. In the year 944, Kairwang fell, the beating heart of Afriqiya's soul, a city whose roots ran deeper than empires, where minarets pierced the sky and wisdom filled countless scrolls. But when Abu Yazid's followers poured through its gates, they sought no treasure. They raised their voices in prayer. They stood in reverent silence. They spoke a truth the wealthy had forgotten, but the poor had always known. No throne lasts forever. The Fatimid Caliph Alquim trembled. Messengers raced to the far corners of his realm. Stone walls grew higher. Whispers and gold coins bought eyes and ears in Abu Yazid's camp. But the tide had already turned. The uprising had found its pulse. A rhythm that drowned out battle cries, swifter than dread itself. The world held its breath. In distant Baghdad, his name was uttered in hushed tones. Could this be the one to topple Shia Fatimid rule in the Maghrib, the reformer long foretold? Yet revolutions are rarely pure, and power, even for those who claim to shun it, seduces. Some of his lieutenants grew cruel. Some twisted war into vengeance, and slowly the clarity of his vision began to blur beneath the weight of ruling. The Fatimids rallied. A new caliph, Al-Mansur, rose like a blade, unsheathed, younger, sharper, more merciless, and with him came a ruthless cities once liberated fell back into Fatimid hands. The revolution's flame, so bright and fierce, began to flicker. Abu Yazid retreated to the mountains, a shadow of his former self. The man on the donkey now hunted like a beast. But legends aren't born from easy victories. In the caves and valleys of the he became more than a man, a symbol, a whispered hope. Even as Al-Mansur's armies closed in, stories of the Black Broom spread, tales of justice, of a world turned right side up. And in those stories, the seeds of future rebellions took root. For empires may conquer lands, but they cannot kill ideas. Abu Yazid's body would fall, but his spirit, it became the wind itself, howling through the dunes, whispering in marketplaces, a reminder that no tyrant's grip is eternal. The Fatimids would rule for centuries more, but never again without looking over their shoulders, never again without hearing phantom hoofbeats in the night, for Abu Yazid had shown them a truth, that the mightiest caliphate can be shaken by a man with nothing but faith and a donkey to carry him. And in the end, isn't that the most human story of all? The story of the small, rising up against the great, of hope, refusing to be extinguished. So remember Abu Yazid, not as a conqueror, not as a saint, but as a man who dared to dream of a world more just, and in dreaming, set fire to the imaginations of generations. Long after the Fatimid gold has tarnished, long after their palaces have crumbled to dust, his name will still be whispered, a reminder that true power lies not in thrones or armies, but in the unquenchable spirit of the Suhu. Dare to stand against injustice. The man on the donkey may have fallen, but his journey, it continues, in every act of defiance, in every cry for freedom, in every heart that refuses to bow. Abu Yazid rides on, and the black broom, it still sweeps, waiting for the day when the world is finally clean. Insert CapCut prompt. Animate a sweeping battle map of Ifriqiya, showing Abu Yazid's expansion from the Nafusa Mountains through Kairwang. Overlay visuals of Fatimid gold melting in fires, scrolls burning, and silhouettes of donkeys crossing desert trails. The sands of time may shift, burying empires and erasing borders, but some stories, they endure, carved not in stone, but in the very soul of a people. Abu Yazid's rebellion was more than a footnote in history. It was a moment when the impossible became possible, when the voiceless found their song, and though the Fatimids would eventually crush his army, they could never truly defeat what he represented. For every generation thereafter, there would be those who remembered, those who looked to the horizon and saw not just sand and sky, but the promise of a better world. A world where justice wasn't just a word in holy books, but a living, breathing reality. So let the story of the black broom sweep on. Let it remind us that even in our darkest hours, hope can rise. That tyranny, no matter how entrenched, can be challenged. And that sometimes the most powerful weapon is not a sword or a scepter, but a simple idea that we all deserve to be free. Abu Yazid may have lost his battle, but in the grand tapestry of history, his thread shines bright. A golden strand of defiance woven into the fabric of human struggle. In the whisper of desert winds, in the rustle of ancient scrolls, in the beating hearts of those who still dream of justice. You might just hear it. The distant clip-clop of hooves, the soft bray of a donkey, and know that somewhere, somehow, the man on the donkey still rides. His journey is our journey, his dream, our dream. And as long as there are those who remember, as long as there are those who dare to hope, Abu Yazid's revolution will never truly end. It lives on, in you, in me, in all who believe that a better world is possible. So take up the broom, sweep away injustice, and let the story continue. For in the end, it is not the rulers who shape history. It is the dreamers, the rebels, the ones crazy enough to believe that a man on a donkey can shake the foundations of empires, and perhaps, just perhaps, change the world. By the year 947, the fire had started to dim. Abu Yazid, once a storm on the horizon, was now a wounded flame, flickering in the mountains. His forces were splintered, his lieutenants exhausted, and his once loyal towns crushed under siege began to surrender, one by one. But the man himself, still on his donkey, still wrapped in that same tattered black cloak, still preaching justice in the dry wind, even as fate closed in, the sun-baked stones of the mountains bore silent witness to the fading rebellion. These ancient peaks, carved by wind and time, had sheltered countless dreams of freedom. Now they cradled the last embers of Abu Yazid's defiance. His voice, once a thunderclap that shook empires, had dwindled to a hoarse whisper, yet still it carried, borne on the hot desert breeze, whispering of a world turned upside down, a world where the lowly rode high and the mighty were brought low. In the shadowed valleys and on the windswept ridges, the remnants of his army huddled, their eyes, once blazing with revolutionary fire, now held only the dull gleam of desperation. They were the last of the true believers, clinging to hope even as it slipped through their fingers like sand. Towns that had once flung open their gates to welcome Abu Yazid now barred them tight. The smell of fear hung heavy in their narrow streets. Fear of retribution, fear of the relentless march of the Fatimid army, fear that the dream they had dared to embrace would be their undoing. Yet through it all, Abu Yazid rode on. His donkey, once a symbol of humility that had inspired thousands, now stumbled on weary hooves. The beast's ribs showed through its patchy hide, a mirror to the gaunt faces of the rebels who still followed their leader. Abu Yazid's black cloak, tattered and sun-bleached, fluttered in the hot wind like a tattered banner. It was no longer a shroud of mystery, but a threadbare reminder of how far they had fallen, how far they had come. His words, once sharp as a scimitar, now rasped from cracked lips. But still, he spoke of justice, of a world remade, of hope, even as it slipped away like water in cupped hands. Slow motion, sand swirls across a barren mountainside, each grain catching the fading light like a dying star. As the dust settles, we see a lone figure emerge. Abu Yazid, hunched on his faithful donkey, rides slowly across the frame. Behind him, the sky bleeds from gold to deep purple, as if the very heavens mourn what is to come. It was here, in the unforgiving embrace of the mountains, that Abu Yazid chose to make his final stand. These peaks, ancient as time itself, had seen empires rise and fall. They had weathered storms, both natural and man-made. Now they would bear witness to the last gasp of a rebellion that had once threatened to reshape the very foundations of power in North Africa. The Fatimid Caliph Al-Mansur approached like a gathering storm. Gone was the uncertainty that had plagued him in the early days of the revolt. Now he moved with the cold precision of a predator that has caught the scent of wounded prey. Al-Mansur wielded power like a double-edged sword. In one hand, he held the scepter of religious authority, proclaiming divine right and eternal truth. In the other, he gripped the reins of military might, honed by years of conflict into a weapon of terrible efficiency. This time, the Caliph came not merely to quell a rebellion, he came to obliterate it, to salt the earth where it had taken root, to ensure that no whisper of Abu Yazid's dream would ever again stir the hearts of the downtrodden. What followed was not a battle in any true sense of the word. It was a hunt, a methodical, merciless pursuit that left no stone unturned, no crevice unexplored. Valleys that had once echoed with the songs of shepherds now rang with the clash of steel and the screams of the dying. Villagers that had offered bread and shelter to the rebels saw their homes put to the torch, their wells poisoned, their very names struck from maps and memories. The Fatimid army moved like a plague of locusts, devouring all in its path. Those who had dared to aid Abu Yazid, even in the smallest ways, found themselves branded as enemies of the state. A kind word, a morsel of food, a moment's shelter, all became crimes punishable by death. In this maelstrom of violence and retribution, Abu Yazid found himself cornered. The mountains that had been his refuge now became his prison. Each pass blocked, each escape route cut off. The noose tightened, slowly but inexorably. How did it end? The stories vary, as they often do when legend and history intertwine. Some say he was betrayed, that one of his own, broken by torture or tempted by promises of clemency, led the Fatimid forces to his hidden camp. Others claim he simply ran out of places to run, that the relentless pursuit finally wore down even his indomitable spirit. The truth, as always, likely lies somewhere in between. A tapestry woven of courage and despair, loyalty and betrayal, fate and cruel circumstance. What is certain is that the end, when it came, was brutal. Abu Yazid, the man who had ridden a donkey and shaken an empire, was captured. The hands that had once gestured in fiery sermons were bound. The voice that had called thousands to arms was silenced. He was tortured, not merely for information, but as a spectacle, a warning to any who might dare to follow in his footsteps. The Fatimids wanted not just his defeat, but his utter humiliation, and then he was killed. The accounts differ on the method, but all agree on the finality. The flame that had burned so bright was extinguished, but the Fatimids were not content with mere death. They displayed his body like a grotesque trophy, a reminder of the fate that awaited those who challenged the established order. His corpse became a symbol, not of the rebellion he had led, but of its utter failure. In the official histories penned by the victors, Abu Yazid's movement was dismissed as heresy, a dangerous deviation from true faith, a cancer that had been cut out for the good of all. His dream of a more just world was buried beneath a mountain of stones and a sea of silence. Yet dreams, especially in the harsh and unforgiving landscape of North Africa, have a way of persisting, of taking root in the most unlikely places and flourishing against all odds. In hidden corners, in the whispered conversations of those who remembered, Abu Yazid's legacy lived on among the Ibedis of the Nafusa Mountains, whose ancestors had first kindled the spark of rebellion. In the tales told by desert traders as they huddled around campfires beneath star-strewn skies, he became a legend, a symbol of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. The humble man who dared to challenge the mighty, the broom that had tried to sweep clean the accumulated dust of injustice and oppression. To some, he was a martyr, a holy man who had given his life in pursuit of a purer faith and a more equitable world. In remote shrines and hidden caves, candles were lit in his memory. Prayers were whispered, not to him, but inspired by his example. The image fades from Abu Yazid's broken body, illuminated by guttering torches, to a different scene. Weathered faces of Berber elders, lined by sun and hardship, bow in prayer within the cool shadows of desert mosques. Their lips move in silent supplication, perhaps calling on the spirit of the rebel who had once walked among them. The scene shifts again. A single candle flickers in a rough clay shrine, its light dancing on walls adorned with ancient symbols. Is it a trick of the light, or does the flame cast a shadow in the shape of a man astride a donkey? And so, the story of Abu Yazid survives. Not in grand monuments or gleaming coins struck to commemorate victory, but in the weathered hands and quiet voices of those who still walk the dry roads of faith and fire. It lives in the hearts of those who look at the world as it is and dare to imagine what it could be, in the courage of those who stand up, even when standing seems futile, in the hope that whispers that even the mightiest empires can be shaken by the faith of the humble. As the last echoes of Abu Yazid's rebellion fade into the mists of history, we turn our gaze from the mountain strongholds of the 10th century. The wheel of time spins on, bringing new challenges, new dreams, and new fires waiting to be kindled in the hearts of those who yearn for justice. The story of the donkey rider may have ended, but the spirit that drove him lives on. In every voice raised against tyranny, in every hand extended to help the oppressed, in every heart that dares to believe that a better world is possible. And so we leave Abu Yazid to his rest among the eternal stones of the... But we carry with us the ember of his dream, waiting for the wind of change to fan it once more into a blazing flame. Long before the winds of rebellion whispered through the long before Abu Yazid's donkey carried the weight of defiance against an empire, another colossus had already sunk its teeth deep into this ancient land, with roads that stretched like veins across the desert, with swords that glinted in the harsh African sun, and with salt that flowed like white gold through its arteries. Rome had carved its name into the very bedrock of North Africa. Welcome, traveller. In the heart of what we now call Tunisia, there lies a dusty outcrop, forgotten by time and overlooked by history. Today, it slumbers beneath the weight of centuries, a quiet sentinel to ages past. But once, oh once, this barren rock pulsed with life, a shimmering jewel in Rome's African crown, one of its most lucrative outposts on this sun-scorched continent. Picture, if you will, the scene as it once was. The air thick with dust and sweat, the ground trembling beneath the weight of countless feet and hooves. Here, in the sweltering heat of the 2nd century CE, Roman ingenuity collided with African abundance. Their engineers, those masters of stone and water, discovered something here that would make emperors smile and slaves weep. Marble, yes, that gleaming white stone, so prized in the forums and temples of distant Rome. But more than that, something far more precious to the lifeblood of empire, salt from the hidden veins of inland mines, wrenched from the earth by calloused hands. Salt from the shimmering basins of the desert, where the sun baked it into crusts as hard as armor. Salt from the coastal flats of El Gerid, where it lay like scattered diamonds, gathered and carried on the backs of camels to the hungry depots of Why such fervor for this simple mineral? Because in the grand machinery of empire, salt was more than just a seasoning for the wealthy. It was the very mortar that held together Rome's vast ambitions. Roman legionaries, those grim-faced enforcers of imperial will, received their pay not in coins alone, but in rations of salt. Towns and villages across the empire paid their taxes not just in grain or gold, but in salted fish and preserved meats. And here, in the sun-baked provinces of Africa, in Ifriqiya especially, Rome found its larder, its pantry to feed the insatiable appetite of its Mediterranean war machine. At Kimtu, the salt flowed in like rivers of white fire, and the slaves worked until their bodies gave out. They came in their thousands, these forgotten souls. Many were torn from the Berber highlands, where their ancestors had roamed free for millennia. Others were dragged from deeper in the Sahara, from tribes whose names are now lost to time. All found themselves here, in the stone quarries and salt warehouses of where the only music was the crack of whips and the groaning of overburdened bodies, their backs bent under loads no man should bear, their skin burned and cracked in the merciless sun. Their names, ... Their names were lost, replaced by numbers carved into collars or branded onto flesh. Can you see them now? The Roman overseer, dust caked on his sun-leathered face, gesturing imperiously with his whip. Beside him, a man, an African, muscles rippling beneath skin dark as ebony, strains to lift a massive block of carved stone. Sweat glistens on his body, each droplet catching the light like a tiny, mocking star. This was the heart of Rome's African engine. Here, salt slabs were carved with the precision of jewelers, packed tightly in crates stamped with the imperial seal. These precious cargoes were then loaded onto creaking wagons, drawn by oxen whose eyes seemed as dead as those of the slaves who drove them. From Kimtu, these white treasures rolled out to the great ports of the African coast, to Hippo Regius, where Augustine would one day preach, to mighty Carthage, risen again from Scipio's ashes, and from these harbors, salt-laden ships set sail across the azure Mediterranean, bound for Rome, for Athens, for the very mouths of Caesar's ever-hungry legions. But at what cost was this bounty reaped? Lives were lost in the crushing darkness of the salt pits, men and women swallowed by the very earth they mined, eyes were blinded by the constant dust, reduced to weeping orbs that saw only shadows, and always, there was salt in the wounds, a cruel joke of fate that burned and stung with every lash, every fall, every moment of despair. Today Kimtu lies silent. The quarries are empty, the warehouses long since crumbled to dust. But listen closely, in the whisper of the wind through broken columns, in the rustle of sand over fallen stones, you might hear the echoes of those forgotten souls. For beneath this silence lie the bones of those who built an empire they would never see. Their sweat salted the pages of history books that would never speak their names. They were the foundation upon which Rome's African dreams were built. The nameless, faceless multitude who made possible the glory of distant marble palaces. Look now upon these ruins. See how the once mighty pillars lie, cracked and tumbled, how the crypts have sunk into the embracing earth, and there, do you see them? The ghostly silhouettes of ancient workers, their forms shimmering like heat, mirages against the weathered stone. They move with the slow, inexorable rhythm of the eternally damned, forever lifting, forever straining, forever forgotten. These were the true builders of Rome's reach. Not the emperors in their purple robes, not the generals with their gleaming armor. It was these, the salt miners, the quarry slaves, the nameless thousands who carved Rome's name across a continent, and yet no statues were raised to honor their sacrifice. No triumphal arches bore their likenesses. They lived and died in the salt and the dust. Their only monument, the empire they helped to build, an empire that would, in time, crumble just as surely as the stones of Kimtu. But our journey does not end here, in this graveyard of imperial ambition. For as one empire fades, another always rises to take its place. And so we must leave these sun-bleached ruins, these silent witnesses, to forgotten toil. Our path now leads us out of the harsh lights of Roman domination and into the perfumed shadows of another empire entirely. An empire of silk and spice, of wisdom and war, that would change the face of North Africa forever. In the next chapter of our tale, we shall climb from these dusty depths and into the opulent halls of a new power, a power that would bring not salt and slavery, but poetry and mathematics, a power that would write its name across the Maghreb, not in Latin, but in flowing Arabic script. But that, dear traveler, is a story for another time. For now, let us pause and remember those who labored here in Kimtu. Let us honor, in our hearts, if nowhere else, the nameless multitudes whose sweat and blood are forever mixed with the salt of this ancient land. For in the end, it is not the conquerors who truly shape the world, but those who toil unseen beneath the weight of empires. And here, in the silent ruins of Kimtu, their story still whispers on the wind, waiting for those with ears to hear and hearts to understand. They came from the mountains, from villagers hidden in olive groves, from oases where date palms swayed over silent wells. There were Berbers, Imazigan, the free people, and yet, in the eyes of Rome, they were property, captured in raids, sold in markets from Leptis Magna to Carthage, branded, broken, and marched across the plains to places like There, under Roman flags, they became the labor behind the empire's most precious material, not just salt, but permanence. Marble to build temples, salt to preserve armies, sandstone to pave roads that still remain today. But these enslaved Berbers did not just break stone and haul salt, they carried their culture with them, even in chains. They sang work songs in Tamazight, they painted talismans on the walls of their quarters, symbols to ward off evil. They shared stories at night, around stolen fires, about mountain gods who would one day crush all emperors. Their revolts were few, but their resistance was spiritual, a refusal to forget who they were. Some escaped, some were born into freedom after laws changed under later empires. Others died in silence, buried beneath the very salt they mined. To Rome, they were labor. To history, they are echoes. But in North African memory, in whispered tales and desert songs, they are still remembered, not as slaves, but as ancestors. And though their stories were never carved in marble, they left something heavier behind. The knowledge that even the might of Rome was built on the backs of those it tried to erase. In the shadow of empire, they toiled under the scorching sun. They endured. Their hands, calloused and cracked, shaped the very foundations of Roman power. Salt, white gold of the ancient world, a preservative, a currency, a symbol of life itself, and for the Berbers it became their curse and their legacy. In the quarries of Kimtu, the air was thick with dust and despair. The sound of hammers striking stone echoed across the land, a relentless rhythm that marked the passage of days, years, lifetimes. Children born into bondage never knew the taste of freedom. They learned to walk on salt-crusted earth, their first words drowned out by the clanking of chains. But in the quiet moments, when guards turned their backs, mothers whispered ancient lullabies. Fathers traced the shapes of distant mountains in the dirt. They remembered. They resisted. They remained. The empire saw them as tools, as beasts of burden. But each Berber slave carried within them a flame, a spark of defiance that Rome could never extinguish. In the heat of the day, they dreamed of cool mountain streams. In the silence of night, they heard the whispers of their ancestors. In the harshest moments, they found strength in shared glances, in the subtle touch of a hand, in the knowledge that they were not alone. Salt crystals formed on their skin, a glittering armor that spoke of their resilience, each grain a testament to their endurance, each crystal a silent rebellion against those who would break them. Some tried to flee, risking everything for a taste of freedom. They ran under cover of darkness, their hearts pounding with the rhythm of distant drums. Most were caught, punished, returned to the mines, but their attempts became legends, whispered stories of courage that gave others hope. In the markets of Carthage, newly captured Berbers arrived. Wide-eyed, terrified, they faced a future of endless toil. But among the slaves, a network formed, a silent community that welcomed, that taught, that preserved. They passed down knowledge like precious gems. How to survive the heat, how to avoid the overseer's lash, how to find moments of joy in a world designed to crush it. And in those moments, when no one was watching, they danced. Subtle movements, barely perceptible, but alive with the spirit of mountains and desert winds. Their gods traveled with them, hidden in symbols etched on walls, in patterns woven into cloth, in the very way they moved. Roman temples rose around them, but in their hearts they worshipped older, wilder deities. As years passed, some found unexpected allies, a kind word from a Roman merchant, a moment of compassion from a young soldier, small acts that reminded them of their shared humanity. But for most, life remained a constant struggle. The salt mines were insatiable, demanding more and more. Bodies broke under the strain. Spirits wavered in the face of endless toil, yet still they persevered. They found strength in small victories. A secret language developed through gestures. Knowledge passed down in whispers. Traditions kept alive in the flicker of firelight. And as empires rose and fell, as new conquerors came and went, the Berber spirit remained. Bent, perhaps, but never broken. In modern times, the ruins of Kemtu stand silent. Tourists wander, marveling at ancient engineering, but in the whisper of wind through stone, in the glint of sunlight on salt-crusted earth, the echoes of those forgotten lives remain. Archaeologists uncover fragments. A child's toy carved from discarded marble, a talisman hidden in a wall for 2,000 years, graffiti etched in a language long silenced, each discovery a window into lives once thought lost, each artifact a testament to the enduring human spirit. For the descendants of those ancient Berbers, these are not just relics. They are reminders of ancestors who refused to be erased, who carried their culture through the darkest of times. In villages across North Africa, elders still tell tales of those days. Stories passed down through generations of strength found in suffering, of identity preserved against all odds. And in those stories, the slaves are not victims. They are heroes, survivors, the foundation upon which a people's identity was built and rebuilt. So when we look at the grand monuments of Rome, the roads that stretched across continents, the temples that reached for the heavens, we must remember, behind every stone, every block of marble, every grain of salt, there were hands, there were lives, there were stories. The empire sought to write history in granite and gold, but the true history, the human history, was written in calluses, in whispers, in acts of quiet defiance. As we stand now, looking back across the centuries, we see not just the might of Rome, but the indomitable spirit of those it sought to conquer. In our next chapter, we will delve deeper into the machinery of this system. We will explore the logistics, the engineering, the brutal scale of ancient salt extraction, because salt to the Romans was not just survival, it was control. But as we've seen, even in the face of such control, the human spirit found ways to resist, to remember, to remain free. And that, perhaps, is the greatest legacy of all. To understand the reach of salt in the Roman world, you must first grasp their obsession with order. Rome did not simply conquer. It calculated, it mapped, measured, taxed, and exported even the minerals beneath your feet. And in places like Kemtu, nestled in present-day Tunisia, the Roman saltworks became a masterpiece of brutal efficiency. They built evaporation basins using stone blocks and plastered clay. They rerouted water through canals to flood shallow pans, then waited for the sun to do its part, drying the water, leaving behind crystals of salt. Once dried, the salt was raked into mounds by enslaved workers, transported by oxen or human carts, loaded into amphorae, clay jars stamped with Roman seals. Each batch had a record. Each region had a quota. Each overseer had a ledger. Salt from Kemtu didn't stay in Africa. It fed garrisons in Gaul, preserved fish in Hispania, lined the tables of Roman aristocrats who never once saw the hands that made it. And those hands, often blistered, cracked, sunburnt, belonged to Africans, Berbers, Punics, other enslaved or low-caste workers from the fringes of empire. The tools were simple: wooden rakes, leather sacks, wheelbarrows with iron rims. But the system, a thing of terrifying sophistication. Even the word salarium comes from salarium, the payment Roman soldiers sometimes received. In salt, Rome understood what we often forget. Salt is power. Control salt, and you control preservation. Control preservation, and you control armies, food, and survival itself. But Chem2 was more than just a salt mine. It was a symbol of how Rome extracted not just minerals from the land, but time from its people. How it turned sweat into empire, and how even the driest places could be made profitable. If you did uncare who paid the cost, in the scorching heat of the African sun, the salt pans of Chem2 stretched as far as the eye could see. A vast network of shallow basins, shimmering like a mirage in the distance. The Roman engineers had transformed this arid landscape into every element carefully designed, every process meticulously planned. Water from distant springs was channeled through aqueducts, snaking across the terrain like veins of life. These man-made rivers fed the salt pans, flooding them with precision, and then the waiting began. Days turned to weeks, as the relentless sun beat down, evaporating the water, concentrating the brine. Salt crystals formed, delicate at first, then growing, hardening under the African sky. But nature's work was only the beginning. When the time was right, an army of workers descended upon the pans, their skin darkened by the sun, their hands calloused from endless labor. With wooden rakes, they scraped and gathered, piling the salt into glistening mounds. The work was back-breaking, endless. From dawn to dusk, they toiled under the watchful eyes of Roman overseers. Each worker a cog in a vast machine, their sweat and blood the oil that kept it running. As the salt was gathered, a different kind of precision took over. Roman clerks, their styluses scratching on wax tablets, recorded every ounce, every bushel. The empire's hunger for data was as insatiable as its thirst for salt. Oxen-drawn carts creaked under the weight of their crystalline cargo, winding their way to storage depots. There, the salt was packed into amphorae, each jar a testament to Roman standardization. These were no ordinary containers. Each amphora bore the stamp of imperial authority, a seal that spoke of quality, of control, of Rome's reach. From Chem2, the salt began its journey. Loaded onto ships at Carthage, it sailed across the Mediterranean, carried by mules over mountain passes. It reached the farthest corners of the empire. In Gaul, legionaries seasoned their rations with African salt. In Hispania, it preserved the catch of fishermen, ensuring Rome's tables were never without delicacies. In the markets of Rome itself, it was a commodity of life and luxury. But for all its travels, the salt never truly escaped its origins. Each crystal carried with it the unseen cost of its creation, the toll exacted on the land, on the workers, on the very fabric of African society. For the Berbers, once proud nomads of the desert, the salt works were a prison of stone and brine. Their knowledge of the land, once used for survival, now bent to the will of Roman industry. Punic descendants, heirs to the legacy of Carthage, found themselves reduced to laborers in their ancestral lands. The empire that had destroyed their forebears extracted their sweat, their skill, their very essence, and there were others. Countless unnamed souls from across Africa and beyond, brought by slave traders, by war, by desperation, all finding themselves under the same merciless sun. Their stories were not recorded in Roman ledgers. Their names did not grace the amphorae that carried their labor, but their hands shaped the empire as surely as any legion. In the cool halls of Roman villas, far from the heat and dust of aristocrats sprinkled this salt on their food without a thought, unaware of the human cost of each grain. But the system that brought it to their tables was vast and intricate. A network of roads, ships, and caravans, of tax collectors, merchants, and middlemen, all part of Rome's grand design. The word salarine itself, so common, so mundane, carries within it the echo of this system. Salarium, the salt ration given to soldiers, a reminder that even wages were once measured in this white gold. Rome's genius lay not just in conquest, but in organization, in turning the raw materials of the world, stone, wood, flesh, into a machine of unprecedented scale, a machine that could extract wealth from the most unlikely places. Kimtu was a testament to this power, a place where the empire's hunger for resourcement, its appetite for order and control. Here, in the salt pans of Africa, Rome's true nature was laid bare, not in marble monuments or lofty philosophies, but in the brutal efficiency of extraction. It was a place where the abstract ideals of empire became concrete reality, where maps and ledgers, quotas and tallies translated into back-breaking labor and mountains of salt. And yet, for all its harshness, Kimtu was not unique. Across the empire, similar scenes played out in silver mines in Spain, marble quarries in Greece, wheat fields in Egypt, each a cog in the vast machine of Rome, each extracting not just resources from the earth, but life and labor from conquered peoples. As the sun set over Kimtu, casting long shadows across the salt pans, the day's work would come to an end. But the empire's hunger never ceased. Tomorrow would bring another day of labor, another quota to fill, another shipment to send. The endless cycle of extraction and export, the lifeblood of an empire built on salt and sweat. In our final story tonight, we leave behind the mines and machines and step into the silk-lined world of the Ottoman beys of Tunis, men who lived far from the salt pans, but whose palaces were built on the back of every grain. Their tale is one of luxury and power, of politics and intrigue. But at its heart, it too is a story of salt, of how this simple, mineral-shaped empires, long after Rome had crumbled to dust. In the heart of Tunis, far from the white glare of the salt flats, stood palaces shaded by citrus trees and cooled by marble fountains, whispering in Arabic. This was the world of the beys. Ottoman rulers who wore velvet robes, sipped sweet coffee in mosaic courtyards, and signed trade agreements with pens dipped in rosewater. But make no mistake, their power flowed quietly, and often, from salt, the air here was heavy with the scent of jasmine and intrigue. In these ornate chambers, where golden light filtered through mashrabia screens, and servants moved like shadows, pouring coffee into delicate cups, the fate of a nation was decided, not with swords or cannons, but with whispers and nods, with the scratch of a quill on parchment. By the 17th century, Tunis was no longer a mere outpost. It had blossomed into a capital semi-autonomous under the Ottoman Empire, and its beys controlled more than just borders. They held sway over the very lifeblood of trade, the white gold that flowed like rivers across the sun-baked land. They controlled caravans, their laden camels swaying across dunes like ships on a golden sea. They commanded customs houses, where every grain and bale was counted, weighed, and taxed. And most crucially, they ruled the salt routes. Those ancient paths that carried wealth and power across continents, through a network of appointed officials, eyes and ears in every town and oasis. They taxed every grain of salt that crossed their territories, from the vast, shimmering expanse of Shatt el-Jarad, where salt crusted like frost on the earth, to the bustling ports of the Mediterranean, where ships creaked and gulls cried. Nothing moved without their knowledge, without filling their coffers. Picture it, an animated map unfurling before your eyes, tracing the salt routes through the parched landscapes of southern Tunisia. Watch as they converge on Tunis, a spider's web of commerce with the Bey's palace at its center. In marketplaces along the way, coins change hands, the clink of metal a quiet echo of the wealth flowing northward. The Beys, in their wisdom or their cunning, understood a fundamental truth. They didn't need to dig the salt. They didn't have to carry it on their backs or load it onto ships. The salt moved because they allowed it to move, and in that permission lay their true strength. And what did they build with this power? Pleasure gardens bloomed in the desert, lush oases where peacocks strutted and fountains played. Libraries were stocked with the finest Persian poetry, the shelves groaning under the weight of wisdom from Baghdad to Cordoba. Diplomats from distant lands were received beneath ceilings painted with 1,000 stars, each one a silent witness to the deals struck in hushed tones. Their wives, far from being mere ornaments, were often highly educated, versed in literature, mathematics, and the subtle arts of influence. They wore dresses woven in Damascus, silk so fine it seemed to float on the air, embroidered with gold thread that caught the light like captured sunbeams. Their children, heirs to this world of refined power, studied Quranic law alongside Greek philosophy. In cool, tiled rooms, they debated the nature of justice and the obligations of rulers, their young minds sharpened on the whetstone of ancient wisdom. In tiled courtyards, where orange trees cast dappled shadows, their guards rode Arabian horses, the beasts' hooves striking sparks from the stones. These were not mere soldiers, but living symbols of the Bey's might, elegant, disciplined, and utterly loyal. But beneath all this elegance, this veneer of cultured sophistication, lay strategy as sharp as a desert wind. Every Bey, from the moment he assumed the velvet robes of office, knew a truth as old as trade itself. Control the ports, and you control the trade. Control the trade, and Europe must deal with you, no matter how dry your deserts or how small your armies. So salt became more than just a mineral to season food. It transformed into a tool of diplomacy, a lever of influence that could tip the scales of power across the Mediterranean. European merchant ships, their holds full of luxuries and necessities alike, arrived in Tunisian ports with captains who bowed low before the Bey's officials. Imagine the scene. A Tunisian customs officer, ledger in hand, his eyes sharp as he inspects crates of salt. Behind him looms the bulk of a European merchant vessel, its crew watching nervously. Every grain counted, every tax calculated. This was how empires were built, not on battlefields, but in the quiet arithmetic of trade. And while Berber workers sweated under the merciless sun, their backs bent as they harvested the earth's white bounty, and Roman ruins crumbled in silence, testament to empires long fallen. The Beys dined on olives and lamb. Each morsel was, of course, seasoned with the very salt they taxed but never deigned to touch with their own hands. Their power was velvet-trapped, cushioned in luxury and hidden behind walls of protocol and etiquette, but it was power nonetheless, as real and as vital as the blood that flowed through their veins. As empires rose and fell like the tide, as camels gave way to the iron horses of railroads, and ancient coins were replaced by contracts written in flowing script, one truth endured beneath it all. It whispered in the rustle of silk robes, in the gurgle of fountains, in the quiet scratch of pen on parchment, in Tunisia's long dance between dust and empire, between the harsh realities of the desert and the glittering dreams of power. Salt was never just a mineral. It was memory, crystallized. It was control, made tangible. It was history itself, preserved grain by precious grain. The Beys understood this. In their palaces of marble and cedar, cooled by breezes scented with lemon blossom, they held the past and future of their land in their hands. With each tax levied, with each trade agreement signed, they wove themselves into the very fabric of Tunisia's story. They were not conquerors, these Beys. They did not need to be, for they had mastered a subtler, more enduring form of rule. They had made themselves indispensable, a fulcrum upon which the balance of power in the region rested. And so, as we drift into the final stretch of our journey, a slow return from palaces and pain, from the heights of power and the depths of human toil, we find ourselves settling into a quieter space. Here, in the hush that falls after the last echoes of history have faded, we can reflect on the true nature of power, on the weight of salt, and on the enduring legacy of those who ruled not by force, but by finesse. For in the end, all stories settle, the grandest palaces crumble, the mightiest empires fall to dust, but the lessons remain etched in salt and stone, waiting for those with the wisdom to read them. And as the sun sets over Tunis, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, we are left with a final truth. In the great ledger of history, it is not always the loudest voices that leave the deepest mark. Sometimes it is those who move quietly, who understand the true value of salt and silence, who shape the world in ways that echo through the centuries. As the sun dipped behind the olive groves of Tunis, the city didn't sleep. It changed tempo. Torches flickered to life in the courtyards, casting dancing shadows on ancient walls. The haunting melodies of the ney and the rhythmic pulse of the tambour filled the air with a mystical energy. Within the palace walls, a different kind of music unfolded. The rituals of power, choreographed over centuries, began their nightly performance. Every movement had meaning, every gesture spoke volumes. In this realm of symbols and traditions, nothing was without purpose. Insert CapCut prompt. Nighttime palace courtyard lit by lanterns. Slow pan over a table set with silver dishes and dates. The Bey, ruler of this realm, moved with the grace of one who knew us. Every action was watched and interpreted. He did not simply stand. A servant's voice announced his rising. He did not merely speak. A poet's quill captured his words in flowing script. And when his will became law, when he signed an order that could shape destinies, he pressed a personal seal into molten wax. Carnelian, blood red, and ancient marked his authority. But this was not the pageantry of ego. This was the architecture of power itself. A language without words, reminding all who witnessed. From the lowliest palace, guard toe the haughtest European ambassador. In this city, authority had its own heartbeat. Insert CapCut prompt. Close-up of Ottoman-style calligraphy, seal stamping parchment, ceremonial hand-washing with rose water. Each week, as regular as the tides, the Bey held court. The Diwane chamber, domed like the heavens, became the stage for this ritual of rule. He sat, still as stone, flanked by advisors in pristine white turban sand robes of rich emerald green, their presence a living reminder of the wisdom and wealth that supported his reign. Before him, the dramas of his kingdom unfolded. Petitions were read aloud, voices trembling with hope or fear, disputes that had festered in the bazaars and back, Aliceware laid bare, awaiting his judgment. Foreign gifts arrived, each a silent negotiation. Bolts of silk so fine they seemed to flow like water, barrels of Venetian wine dark as night, exotic spices that spoke of distant lands. Each gift examined, weighed, its meaning deciphered, and through it all, the Bey sat, quiet, watchful, a blink, a nod, the slightest raise of an eyebrow. These subtle movements shaped fates. Merchants rose or fell on the curve of his lip. Soldiers' futures hung on the tilt of his head. Families found mercy or ruin in the softening of his gaze. Insert CapCut prompt. Stylized reenactment of a Diwan audience. Slow motion shot of a merchant kneeling with tribute. But power did not end at the threshold of the great halls. It seeped into the private spaces, into moments of solitude that were no less laden with meaning. On Fridays, as the call to prayer echoed across the city, the Bey retreated from the weight of his office. The hammam awaited him, a domed sanctuary of steam and marble. Here, in the embrace of heated mist, even the hardest decisions soft. The whisper of water on stone washed away the cares of rule, if only for a moment, in this liminal space between public and private. The man behind the title found brief respite, cleansed and renewed, scented with oils of jasmine and sandalwood. The Bey emerged. Dressed now in kaftanes of intricate embroidery, he walked barefoot towards the prayer hall. His steps, usually so measured and deliberate, now carried a different weight. For here, he approached not as a ruler, but as a servant to a higher power. Sinking to his knees, forehead touching the woven prayer mat, the Bey submitted. In this moment, he was reminded that his authority, vast though it might be, was but a pale reflection of divine will. Insert CapCut prompt. Steam rising in a traditional Turkish bathhouse, hands pouring water from copper bowls. To rule in Tunis was an art form unto itself. It was not merely about commanding army, sir, dictating the flow of salt and gold. It was about mastering the rhythms of power, about weaving authority so deeply into the fabric of life that it became as natural as breathing, for a ruler could be overthrown, a palace stormed, a treasury emptied. But traditions, when rooted in the soul of a culture, were far more resilient. They outlasted dynasties, whispered through generations, and shaped the very essence of a people. And so the Beys of Tunis ruled not just through force, though their armies were fierce, nor through wealth alone, though their coffers brimmed with riches. They ruled through theatre, every public appearance a carefully crafted performance. They ruled through prayer, binding their authority to the divine. They ruled through poetry, ensuring their deeds would echo through time. It was a quiet performance, subtle in its power, but its message rang clear to every subject who bowed their head, to every foreign power that cast covetous eyes upon Tunis. Here, power had found its home. Here, tradition and authority danced in perfect harmony. As night deepened and the city slumbered, the rituals of rule continued their silent work. In shadowed corridors and torchlit chambers, decisions were made that would ripple outward, touching lives far beyond the palace walls. The Bey, now retired to his private quarters, might have seemed just a man, flesh and blood like any other. But the weight of centuries rested upon his shoulders, the expectations of a nation in his every breath. For to rule was not just to command, but to embody the very spirit of a people. To be both the vessel and the guardian of traditions older than memory. And as the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, as the muezzin's call floated on the morning air, the cycle would begin anew. Another day of carefully choreographed power, of decisions big and small, of the endless dance between ruler and rule. For in Tunis, as in all great centers of power, authority was not just wielded. It was performed, breathed, lived, a constant reminder to all who witnessed. Here, in this ancient city by the sea, power had found its rhythm, and those who held the reins would not easily let them slip. Next, we descend into our final chamber, where the echoes of salt, struggle, and sovereignty find their rest, where the weight of history settles like dust, and the legacy of the Bey's whispers still through the winding streets and sun-baked walls of Tunis. There is a moment, just before a dynasty ends, when everything is still beautiful, the palaces are still cleaned. The traders grow nervous, the soldiers grumble, and the young look westward, dreaming of France, or Italy, or something called modernity in the late 1800s. As Europe tightened its grip on North Africa, the Beys of Tunis stood surrounded, their rituals still impressed, their titles still meant something in public. But behind closed doors, decrees came with French signatures. Budgets were checked by colonial accountants, and railroads were built not to serve the people, but to drain the salt, the olive oil, the labor. The grandeur remained, but the independence did not. And so, slowly, like the last embers of a scented candle, the world of the bays dimmed. Some faded into exile, others became symbolic, well-dressed, well-fed, but powerless. And in the quiet, the people adjusted. The hammams still steamed. The souk still buzzed. But the poetry now carried a different tone, one of memory. A whisper that said, there was once a garden, a palace, a rule made of rhythm, not rifles. In the courtyards, where sultans once walked, shadows now dance alone. The fountains that once sang with Lifano stand silent, their voices stolen by time. Can you hear it? The faint echo of laughter, the whisper of silk against marble, the soft clinking of tea glasses in the afternoon sun. These are the ghosts of a golden age, lingering like perfume in empty rooms. The world moves on, relentless in its march. But here, in these forgotten corners, time stands still, frozen in a moment of fading glory. Walk with me through the narrow streets, where the scent of jasmine still clings to crumbling walls. See how the light falls differently now, casting long shadows where once there was only brilliance. The merchants in the bazaar still call out their wares, but their voices carry a different weight, a heaviness born of change, of dreams deferred and futures uncertain. In the distance, you can hear it, the rumble of engines, the clatter of new machines. Progress, they call it, but at what cost? The old ways fade like watercolors in the sun, their vibrant hues bleeding into muted tones. Yet still, they persist in the way a grandmother folds her bread, in the cadence of a storyteller's voice, in the intricate patterns woven into carpets. These are the threads that connect us to what was lost. Remember the bays in their finery, their robes heavy with gold and expectation, how they stood, proud and defiant, even as the world shifted beneath their feet. They were the last of their kind, guardians of a tradition that stretched back centuries. But time, that relentless sculptor, had other plans. Watch as the French flags unfurl, their tricolors a stark contrast to the rich tapestry of Ottoman rule. See how the colonial boots march in perfect time, drowning out the subtle rhythms of the old world. In the palace halls, where once decision shaped empires, now only echoes remain. The scratch of pens on paper, the rustle of foreign languages, the quiet capitulation of a dying era. But listen closely, and you might hear something else. A heartbeat, faint but steady, the pulse of a people who refuse to be erased. For while the bays may fade into history, the spirit of their world lives on, in the stories passed down through generations, in the recipes guarded like precious jewels, in the music that still stirs the soul. This is the legacy of North Africa, a tapestry woven from countless threads, each one a story, a life, a dream. Some threads are cut short, others stretch on for generations, but all are part of the greater whole, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. As night falls on this fading world, the stars come out one by one. They are the same stars that watched over caliphs and sultans, the same stars that guided caravans across vast deserts. In their light, we find continuity, a reminder that even as empires rise and fall, some things remain constant. The wind still whispers secrets in the date palms. The Mediterranean still laps gently at ancient shores. And the people, they endure. They adapt, they remember, they dream. For in the end, it is not the grand palaces or the gilded thrones that define us. It is the small moments of grace, the quiet acts of resistance, the stubborn insistence on beauty in the face of change. This is the true inheritance of the Bays, passed down, not through bloodlines, but through the very air we breathe. It lingers in the taste of mint tea, in the intricate tiles of a forgotten mosque, in the lullabies sung to sleepy children. And so, as we stand at the threshold of a new era, let us pause for a moment. Let us close our eyes and listen. Can you hear it? The faint strains of an oud, the distant call to prayer, the laughter of children playing in sun-drenched courtyards. This is the sound of a world not quite gone, a world that refuses to fade completely. It whispers to us across the years, reminding us of who we were, who we are, and who we might yet become. For, in the end, empires may crumble, but the human spirit endures. It adapts, it remembers, it dreams, and in those dreams, we find the seeds of tomorrow. So let us walk together through these twilight hours, bearing witness to the quiet fade of a golden world. Let us gather the fragments, the memories, the whispered stories, for they are precious beyond measure, these echoes of a time when the world moved to a different rhythm. And as we step into the future, let us carry them with us, not as a burden, but as a gift, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, beauty can still be found, that even as one world ends, another is always beginning, and in that beginning we find hope. Hope that the lessons of the past will not be forgotten. Hope that the richness of our heritage will continue to inspire. Hope that the spirit of the Bays, their dignity, their grace, their love of beauty, will live on in the hearts of generations to come. For this is the true legacy of North Africa, not conquest, not colonization, but the enduring power of culture, of tradition, of the human spirit. So as the sun sets on this chapter of history, let us not mourn what is lost. Instead, let us celebrate what remains. The stories, the songs, the flavors, the intricate dance of light and shadow on ancient walls. For in these things, we find the essence of who we are. A people shaped by the tides of history, yet never fully defined by them. And as we turn our faces toward the future, let us carry with us the wisdom of the past, the knowledge that empires may rise and fall, but the human heart remains constant, in its hopes, its fears, its endless capacity for beauty. This is our inheritance. This is our legacy. This is the quiet fade of a golden world, not into darkness, but into the soft light of memory, where it will live forever, a beacon for all who seek to understand the rich tapestry of human experience. And so, we close our eyes beneath the baobab skies and let the stories rest in stillness, in memory, and in the dignity they still deserve. For this is not an ending, but a beginning. A new chapter in an ancient story, waiting to be written by us, and for all who come after. Tonight, you journeyed through the sands of time, through empires and revolutions, through the whispers of ancient winds and the echoes of forgotten civilizations, from the shimmering mirages of the Sahara to the thunderous hooves of Hannibal's elephants, to the intricate mosaics of Carthage that never faded, and finally into the labyrinthine souk of Morocco. You have witnessed how North Africa cradled both triumph and tragedy in its sun-baked arms. Insert CapCut prompt. Slow aerial pullback over the Sahara dunes at sunset, transitioning into a star-filled night sky. These were not mere chronicles. Not just empires rising and falling, but lives, vibrant, pulsing lives, people who chased horizons across endless dunes, who carved stories into stone with calloused hands, who sang of freedom from the depths of oases, or built wonders that would outlast kingdoms, and all of them are dust now. but their legacy endures. It lives in the wind-sculpted rock, in the oasis springs, in the hieroglyphs, an abandoned caravan, in the calls to prayer echoing from minarets, older than memory, and now, ... it lives in you. Insert CapCut prompt, close up on weathered Berber hands, weaving a tapestry that dissolves into constellations. As you stand at the crossroads of past and present, feel the weight of millennia settling upon your shoulders. The triumphs of Carthage, the wisdom of Alexandria, the artistry of Fez, all whispering their secrets, if only you'll listen. For in this land where the Sahara meets the sea, where ancient and modern dance an eternal tango, nothing is ever truly forgotten. The footsteps of pharaohs and philosophers, of conquerors and poets, all leave their mark in the shifting sands. And you, dear traveler, are now part of that unbroken chain, a witness to the grand tapestry of human experience, woven across the ages in threads of gold and blood, of dreams and despair. So, as the last rays of the setting sun paint the sky in hues of fire and gold, take a moment to breathe it all in. Let the scent of spices and sea salt fill your lungs. Let the distant strains of Berber music caress your ears. For you stand at the crossroads of continents, where Africa embraces Europe and the Middle East in a timeless dance, where the Mediterranean's azure waters have carried countless stories to distant shores, and as night falls, casting its velvet cloak over the land, remember that darkness here is never truly dark. For the stars above have guided travelers for millennia, their ancient light a beacon of hope and wonder. Insert CapCut prompt, time-lapse of the night sky wheeling over the pyramids of Giza. So as you drift now, deeper into contemplation, into wonder, into the vast expanse of human history, let the sands of time sift through your fingers. Let the voices of the ancients whisper their wisdom. Let the cosmic dance of the heavens remind you of your place in this grand narrative. Because under these eternal skies, where the Nile has flowed since the dawn of civilization, nothing is ever truly lost, only transformed, reborn in the crucible of time and memory. And you, dear traveler, are now a keeper of these stories, a guardian of memories that span epoch. As you return to your world, carry with you the spirit of North Africa, its resilience, its mystery, its enduring beauty, for, in the end, we are all travelers on this cosmic journey, all of us seeking meaning in the vastness of time and space, and perhaps, in the whispers of the desert wind and the timeless gaze of the Sphinx, we might find a fragment of that eternal truth. So go forth now with the blessings of pharaohs and caliphs, of nomads and scholars. Let their courage fuel your adventures. Let their wisdom guide your path. And remember always that under the watchful gaze of the North African sky, you are part of a story far greater than yourself. A story that began long before you and will continue long after. May your journey be as endless as the horizon, as deep as the desert night, and as rich as the tapestry of cultures you've witnessed, until we meet again, on some distant shore or under some foreign star. May the spirit of North Africa live on in your heart. Farewell, fellow traveler, and thank you for sharing in this timeless odyssey